Czechoslovakia made a lot of 8mm, and there are lots of different markings. Today we're looking at a round from 1937. Today we have Czech 8mm Mauser ammunition from 1937. I really like when I get the opportunity to test pre-war ammunition. $2,450. $2,460. $2,422. $2,425. $2,428. These Turkish stripper clips, man. There we go. $2,490. $2,462. $2,407. $2,385. $2,421. So that was our time on the range. Our velocities ranged from 2,385 feet per second to 2,490 feet per second. That gives us a range of 105 feet per second from the lowest to the highest, and an average of 2,435 feet per second. All of these velocities were pretty average, except for that this was just one of the tighter ranges compared to the other ammos we've tested. We didn't have any duds or hang fires. I was a little worried about that last one, but it turned out to be nothing. So every round fired correctly, and I'm pretty happy with this ammo. Now, let's take a close-up look at the box and at some of these rounds. This box is an interesting shape. It's sort of trapezoidal in a number of different ways. The flap is over the top, and then there is this green paper seal going around a pull tab. If you want to save the box because you're collecting this ammo, even if you're shooting a little bit, I recommend cutting it open instead of tearing it. It'll look a lot nicer. The most notable marking is this big X on the top. Now, I haven't seen anything about this in the literature, but I would assume this is put there when it left military service to indicate that it's, well, leaving military service. My other box of ammo has it too. The markings that I can see are Z15. The Z marks the factory, and the 15 marks the number of rounds. The next line, with horrible pronunciation, reads 7.92 mm Ostre Tezki Dabolje VZ34, Dabolje VZ34. Or 7.92 millimeter heavy sharp cartridges, VZ34. Basically heavy Spitzer bullets. And I think the VZ34 is a cartridge designation like M193 or the like. The next line is the powder information. This word prach right here is powder. And VZ24 right there is probably referring to the rifle that it was used for, but I'm not exactly sure on that. I'm also not sure about this info on the bottom. I didn't find a lot of good information on it. Opening it up, it's this weird shape because the rounds are loaded all with the point facing down. Typically you'll have 5 facing down, 5 facing up, and 5 facing down again, or just vice versa of that. So that's a little bit uncommon. Now if I pull this out and look at the head stamp, this Z is a factory code. We'll talk more about that in a moment. 1937 is the year of production, and then that X on the bottom, I'm pretty sure is a Roman numeral indicating that this was made in October. I don't know that for sure, but I did have one source saying it. Now, the case does appear to be annealed, as you can see by the color variation right there. And then also there is a green sealant around the primer, which pre-German occupation indicates heavy ball ammo for the Czech ammo. My test rifle is this Yugoslavian 2447, and although it looks a lot like a VZ24, I'd really like to own a VZ24 Mauser. True Czech VZ24 Mauser. It's the rifle that these rounds would have been made for. The Czech military 8mm was made from roughly the 1920s through the 1950s. Like many nations, Czechoslovakia utilized factory codes. Now, two of the most notable factories were Cellier and Bellot, marked by S and B, and Zbrojovka BRNO, just marked with a Z. And that's what we have today, is the BRNO ammunition. BRNO produced weapons for the military, including the 98-22 Mausers, those are long rifles, the VZ-24 short rifles, and the VZ-26 machine guns, which is what the Bren gun is derived from. And so all of those would have used 8mm Mauser ammunition. Now, after the German occupation began, the BRNO factory was renamed Waffenwerk Brunn, and similarly made German Mausers and machine guns and ammunition for the German military. Now, they continued making ammunition until after the war had ended, and generally speaking, Czech 8mm head stamps are a mess of letters and symbols and numbers, and it's just a lot to keep track of. But as far as I know, BRNO continued to use the Z symbol through all of its production, maybe with the exception of the German era. The Czech military eventually transitioned to Soviet calibers, mostly, looking at U-32 ACP, and they stopped using the 7.92 by 57mm round. Now, BRNO is still a company today, and in the early 2000s it was bought out by CZ, who still owns it, as well as Colt. Our bullets ranged from 196.4 grains to 198.6 grains, so that gives us a spread of 2.2 grains and an average of 197.6 grains. There's some FUD lore that goes around that says these silver bullets are some crazy armor-piercing thing. Basically, in fact, that's absolute nonsense. These rounds are only magnetic because of their jacket. They don't even have a steel core, so the core is completely non-magnetic. These cartridges use a flake powder, which is pretty typical, and the weights range from 44.5 grains to 44.8 grains, so pretty consistent, and an average of 44.7 grains. For me, these rounds performed well. In fact, I've had a number of Czech 8mm rounds from before and after World War II. Generally, I would summarize my findings with this. If the rounds have been stored well, and if your rifle's in good shape, the ammo will work well. But if your striker spring is weak, you may experience some hang fires. I also bought some loose-packed rounds that were just kind of in bulk, and it was a collection of a number of different head stamps, and they did not perform well. More rounds malfunctioned than fired correctly with that particular lot. So if Czech rounds are still in their boxes, that usually means it was stored a little bit better than just a big pile of ammo. I'll probably buy them if they're stored in their boxes still. And if I found them loose, I might buy them and consider them for components only, or if they're really cheap, I might buy them and test them and see if they're worth shooting. So, all of that being said, I am 8mm Mauser Man, and I shot Czech 8mm Mauser from 1937. But I lived on. Looking at U-32 ACP.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.